Welcome. Today I'm going to discuss a subject that a lot of people aren't aware of. Let's all be Austrians. A lot of people aren't aware of the terms in economics or what Austrian economics really is, and in fact, knowing the term isn't necessarily what's important. Applying the terms is where we find all of the value in knowing what's going on. Ethan Nadelman, in his article, Drugs, Prohibition Has Failed Again, discusses how prohibition secured profit for organized crime and how the war on drugs is securing profit for cartels today. The American Journal of Drug and Alcohol Abuse says 50% of adults have used illegal drugs. I don't recommend that we put 50% of the population in prison. And 50% of the illegal drug use has been pot. Nick Miroff with The Washington Post also pointed out that drug cartels, post-legalization of marijuana in Colorado and Washington, have had a 25% cut in their profits and have quit planting marijuana completely because there's no longer profit in it. Application of the war on drugs is from a bad economic policy. The reason they had prohibition and the reason the government has prohibition on illegal drugs today is because they don't understand economics. The housing crisis is another element of bad economic policy. It's been discussed before, but the Journal of Real Estate and Finance talked about how the government, prior to the bubble popping, had reduced loan standards, they insured bad loans, and they held interest rates lower than they needed to be. From the Journal of Money, Credit, and Banking, we talk about how government insurance has caused the banks to take on loans that they otherwise would never have taken on in the beginning. Further, the Journal of Finance points out that risk interest rates being low, being the price of money, made money look cheaper than it really was. So people that couldn't afford to were willing to take on loans that they couldn't afford for houses that they also could not afford. Effectively, what this does is it reallocates wealth from the poorest and middle class to the wealthiest in the banks. Again, this is bad economic policy that's led to this. The answer can never be to continue the same economic policy that led to the tragedy in the first place. Now we're going to go to a more recent issue with the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. The Journal of Global Finance, Intelligence and Policy says that forcing consumption of a product increases demand through arbitrary measures, and an increase in demand always leads to an increase in price. Bloomberg Businessweek pointed out that the FDA is already denying terminal patients on their deathbeds, the right to treatments that haven't been approved by the FDA. Now there will be yet another layer of bureaucracy between patients and care that's administratively applied that has nothing to do with the doctor and the patient themselves. Lastly, a Journal of Financial Service Professionals points out that the administrative hurdles, not just for the patient care itself, but on the employers who employ these people who are now being forced to buy insurance for them, will either raise the cost of employing individuals or raise the cost of the products that they sell. Ultimately, this all boils down to bad economic policy, and all I can do is ask you to pay attention during political debates or when some political candidate is asking you to vote for him, to pay attention to what they're asking. Anytime they talk about intervening from a government perspective to apply the standards that they say are the right ones, they're applying this from a bad economic policy. Now, if you have any questions, go ahead.
What about the folks that can't afford a house about this policy?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so not being able to afford a house due to these economic policies, or being able to afford only because of these economic policies, is actually a bigger issue than a lot of people understand. If we apply a policy that says now you can afford a house, you still can't actually afford the house, you just believe that you can. The price indicators that would normally tell you you can't purchase a house don't exist. The interest rate is low, so you think you can afford a house. The banks aren't forcing you to make a down payment because you haven't saved the money because they have reduced loan standards. So it's the economic policies that have been applied from government that have actually reduced those standards, and they create what's known as moral hazard. And that's going to be discussed going throughout this. The government always creates what they call moral hazard in the economy. Yep.
How does legalizing drugs help drug users?
Legalizing drugs does not specifically help drug users, but it's better to ask that question from the other aspect. How does making drugs illegal help non-drug users? Because by making drugs illegal, there's been increases in violence, increases in organized crime, and increases in the overall crime rates. Now, people will ask the question, well, yeah, if you're, legalizing things, then that just means that you're not making them criminals. You're taking people that were criminals before, making them non-criminals. But we need to remember that prior to making them illegal, they were already illegal to begin with. Bad economic policy also means that they don't have to live with the cost of their decision. I have to live with the cost of their decision when we've made it illegal. I'm the one that has to pay to keep them in prison. I'm the one that has to pay for their health care costs. I'm the one that has to pay for all of the things associated with that if I'm a law-abiding citizen. So by making it legal, you reallocate the cost from the non-consumer of illegal drugs to the consumer of legal